Have you ever seen someone so calm in the face of humiliation that it made you question who they really were? The kind of person who doesn't fight back, not because they're weak, but because they know exactly what would happen if they did. Stick around till the very end of this story, because what happens next will leave you speechless, and trust me, you'll want to hear how it all unfolds. It started on a quiet Friday evening in a small town bar tucked at the edge of a forgotten street. The kind of place where the neon sign flickered half the time, where regulars gathered to escape their lives for a few hours. In one corner, sitting alone with a glass of water, not whiskey, not beer, just water, was an elderly black man. His name was Samuel Briggs, 72 years old. Calm eyes, slow movements, and a silence that filled the space around him like a wall. He didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Every gesture of his hand, every glance from his dark, steady eyes spoke more than most people could in 1,000 words. The bartender, a woman named Laurie, had known him for years. She said he came in every Friday evening at the same time, sat in the same spot, and left after exactly an hour. Never caused trouble, never asked for anything more than that one glass of water. But tonight wasn't going to be like any other night. At the far end of the bar, a group of young men had just walked in. Loud, drunk, and dangerous in that careless way people are when they think the world belongs to them. 5 of them, each one looking to prove something to someone. They laughed too loud, shoved each other too hard, and soon their attention drifted toward Samuel. "Hey, old man," one of them called out. "What's with the water? You saving your liver for church?" The others burst into laughter. Samuel didn't respond. Didn't even look their way, just kept his eyes on the glass in front of him, tracing the rim with one finger. Laurie gave the group a warning look, but it only made them smirk wider. They saw his quietness as weakness. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Another one walked closer, the ringleader, a man with a shaved head and an ego bigger than his muscles. Come on, Grandpa, say something. You too good to talk to us." His voice carried the sharp edge of arrogance that tone bullies use when they think they've already won. Still, Samuel said nothing. He just breathed slowly, controlled, steady. The same kind of breathing a man learns after decades of discipline and restraint. But in that silence, something changed. A flicker of awareness passed through Laurie's eyes. She'd seen that posture before, years ago, in a photo Samuel had shown her once. A younger version of him, wearing a white gi, standing in front of a dojo, surrounded by students bowing to him. And in that moment she realized, if these boys pushed him too far, they were about to make the worst mistake of their lives. But Samuel? He didn't want trouble. He'd lived through too much of it already. He just wanted peace, a quiet night, and maybe the faint comfort of remembering who he used to be. The gang didn't stop. They closed in, voices rising, mocking, testing the limits of the old man's patience. One of them reached out and slapped the glass from his hand. It hit the counter, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Water spilled across the bar top, dripping onto the floor. For a moment, everything froze. Samuel looked down at the shattered glass, then slowly lifted his eyes. Not angry, not afraid, just calm. Deadly calm, deadly calm. And though no one realized it yet, that calm was the quiet before the storm. Have you ever seen a moment so still that you could feel the weight of it pressing on your chest? The kind of silence that doesn't just fill the room, it warns it. That's what it felt like right after that glass shattered. The laughter died. Even the jukebox in the corner seemed to go quiet, like it knew something was about to happen. Samuel didn't move right away. His hand hovered over the counter, fingers tracing a circle through the spilled water. Calm, deliberate, controlled. The gang, still half drunk, didn't catch the shift in energy, but Laurie did. She stepped back from the counter, her heart pounding as if her instincts were screaming, "Don't interfere." Ha. The leader sneered. "What's the matter, old man? Cat got your tongue?" He leaned closer, reeking of alcohol and arrogance, his breath hot with cheap whiskey. "Or you scared?" Samuel finally looked up, his eyes steady, deep, and impossibly calm, locked onto the man's face. "Son," he said quietly, his voice smooth like still water over stone. "You should walk away." That one line changed everything. The tone wasn't threatening. It wasn't loud, but it carried something the young men didn't understand. Authority. Real, earned authority. The leader laughed, trying to shake off the chill that suddenly crept up his spine. "Walk away? Nah, old man. We just got started." He grabbed Samuel's shoulder, meaning to shove him off the stool, but he never got the chance. In a blur faster than anyone could follow, Samuel's hand moved. 1 second it rested on the counter. The next it snapped up, 2 fingers pressing a nerve point at the base of the bully's wrist. The man yelped, his arm collapsing, pain shooting through his hand. In the same motion, Samuel stood, pivoted, and with a gentle twist sent him stumbling backward into his own group. No one in the bar spoke. Lori froze, her breath caught in her throat. The gang stared in disbelief. It didn't look possible. The old man hadn't hit him, hadn't even seemed to use force. It was clean, efficient, controlled. The leader scrambled up, face burning red. You think you can touch me, you old... Before he could finish, Samuel spoke again. I told you to walk away. The room felt heavier now. The other gang members shifted uneasily, unsure whether to jump in or back off. But pride is a dangerous thing, especially when it's mixed with alcohol. One of them lunged forward, throwing a sloppy punch. Samuel stepped aside. Just one step, so small it looked effortless. The punch missed entirely, and before the man knew what happened, Samuel's elbow connected softly with his ribs. Not hard, not brutal, just precise. The man gasped, knees buckling, collapsing with a groan. Now the bar was dead silent. The leader's confidence shattered just like that glass earlier. The others hesitated, their bravado draining out of them with every slow, measured movement Samuel made. He stood there, not a fighter showing off, not a man hungry for violence, but someone who had seen it all before. His stance was relaxed, but his presence filled the room. "Oh, don't mistake kindness for weakness," Samuel said softly. "Some of us fought our battles long before you were even born." The words hung in the air, cold and absolute. And in that instant, the gang realized they hadn't picked a harmless old man to toy with. They had picked a storm that had merely been sleeping. Have you ever wondered what true power looks like when it doesn't need to be shown? The kind of strength that hides behind patience, the kind that waits quietly until there's no other choice. That was Samuel Briggs. And at that moment, as those young men stood frozen in front of him, they were staring at a man who had nothing left to prove but everything under control. The leader's friends looked shaken, but ego is a stubborn enemy. "You think you're tough, old man?" One of them spat, trying to sound braver than he felt. "You think that little trick means something?" Samuel didn't reply. His silence was his weapon, his stillness, his message, and that silence unnerved them more than any threat ever could. The leader wiped his mouth, glaring. His pride was bleeding faster than his courage. "You got lucky," he said through clenched teeth. "Let's see how lucky you are when 5 of us come at you at once." Lori stepped forward from behind the bar, her voice trembling. "You don't want to do that. Trust me. Just let him be." But they didn't listen. They never do. The moment they charged, the air in the bar shifted. It was like the world slowed down. One heartbeat stretched into an eternity. Samuel's body moved before thought, before anger, before fear. Years of training took over, pure instinct. The first man lunged with a wild punch. Samuel sidestepped, his palm snapping up to deflect it and guide the attacker past him. The man's momentum sent him crashing into a bar stool. The second swung from behind. Samuel ducked low, his elbow finding the man's midsection with pinpoint precision. A third came at him with both arms outstretched, trying to grab him. But Samuel rotated, hooking the man's arm and using his own energy against him, flipping him over his shoulder like it was nothing. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. It was clean, efficient, devastating. The kind of movement only decades of discipline could produce. In less than 10 seconds, 3 men were down. The fourth froze halfway across the floor, eyes wide, chest heaving. The leader stood last, hands shaking, sweat sliding down his temple. He had no plan anymore, just fear wearing the mask of fury. Samuel straightened his jacket, his breathing steady, eyes never leaving the leader's face. "Faye, you don't have to finish this," he said quietly. "You've already lost." The leader roared and charged anyway, anger blinding reason. But Samuel didn't fight him, he redirected him. One simple sidestep, a turn of the wrist, and the man's own force carried him face first into the counter. The crack of contact echoed through the room. He slumped, groaning, clutching his jaw. Lori exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The bar smelled of sweat, fear, and the faint scent of spilled water. Samuel stood there, motionless for a moment, surrounded by chaos but untouched by it. His expression wasn't proud or smug, it was sorrowful, because this wasn't victory for him. It was disappointment. Disappointment in a world that had forgotten respect, discipline, and humility. He looked down at the fallen men. The real fight, he said softly, is learning when not to fight. No one responded. No one moved. Then slowly, Samuel turned back to the counter, reached for a napkin, and began wiping up the remnants of the spilled water like nothing had ever happened. Have you ever seen a moment when the world seemed to hold its breath, like even time was afraid to move forward? Well, that's what it felt like after the last thug hit the floor. The bar stood frozen, the hum of the old ceiling fan suddenly sounding louder than it should. Samuel Briggs, 72 years old, stood in the middle of it all, ruffled calm, like a man who just finished sweeping dust off his porch, not dismantled 5 grown men in under half a minute. Lori stared at him, her hands trembling around a half-filled glass. Sam, you... She began but stopped. There were no words big enough for what she'd just seen. Samuel simply adjusted his sleeve, voice quiet and steady. They'll wake up soon. Make sure they get some water, and maybe an apology ready. She blinked. You want to apologize to them? Samuel smiled faintly. No, they'll need to apologize to themselves. That's a harder thing to do. In the corner, one of the younger men groaned, rolling onto his side. His arrogance had evaporated. What replaced it was confusion and shame. He looked up at Samuel, eyes wide, voice shaky. What are you? Samuel looked at him, not with superiority, but with the kind of calm pity only wisdom grants. Just a man who's seen what violence does. To both sides. The rest of the group slowly stirred, their drunken haze fading into pain and humiliation. The leader touched his jaw, feeling the dull ache where his pride used to be. He couldn't look at Samuel, not directly. His mind kept replaying the moment, the stillness, the control, the grace. There had been no anger, no rage, only mastery. Lori finally broke the silence. You told me you used to teach self-defense, but I didn't know you were... A karate, Samuel finished softly. A lifetime ago. He leaned on the counter, his reflection glimmering faintly in the wet wood. I taught kids for 30 years. Discipline, respect, control. But somewhere along the way, the world stopped valuing those things. Everyone's too busy trying to prove they're strong instead of learning when not to be. The leader swallowed hard, shame now sitting heavier than the pain. We didn't know, he muttered. I know, Samuel said. That's why I didn't hurt you. A long pause followed. No one spoke. The jukebox flickered back to life with a soft, static crackle, the faint sound of an old blues song filling the silence. It felt almost poetic, the kind of tune that tells stories about regret and lessons learned too late. The gang stood slowly, nursing bruised egos and aching ribs. One by one, they turned toward the door, not saying a word. Before leaving, the leader stopped and glanced back at Samuel. His voice was low, heavy with something new, respect. You're wrong, son. I did. The door closed behind them. The night air drifted in, cool and cleansing. Lori shook her head, still in disbelief. Sam, how do you stay so calm? He took a slow sip of fresh water, his eyes distant. Because once you've learned how to end a fight in a second, you spend the rest of your life making sure you never have to. Outside, the laughter of the gang had died. Somewhere deep inside them, something had changed. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was respect. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of humility. And Samuel? He just finished his drink, placed a few bills on the counter, and stood up to leave, moving with that same quiet grace, that same silent strength that had carried him through decades of storms. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Some lessons echo long after the teacher has gone. Have you ever realized how a single moment can change the entire course of someone's life? How one encounter, just a few minutes long, can leave a mark deeper than years of experience? That's exactly what happened that night, long after Samuel Briggs had left that dimly lit bar and stepped out into the cold silence of the street. The town was quiet, bathed in the dull glow of flickering streetlights. Samuel's shoes tapped softly against the cracked pavement as he walked, hands tucked into his coat pockets. To anyone passing by, he looked like any other old man heading home. But inside his mind was a storm of thoughts, memories of battles fought long ago, not in bars, but in the dojo, in tournaments, and sometimes in life itself. Back inside the bar, Lori leaned on the counter, staring at the shattered glass Samuel had left behind earlier. It was still there, small, glittering pieces reflecting the dim light. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Still teaching lessons, huh, Sam?" Meanwhile, the gang, 5 young men who had swaggered in like kings, now sat in their car outside the bar. The engine wasn't running. No one spoke. The silence was heavier than the beating they'd taken. The leader, still rubbing his jaw, looked at his friends. "You ever see anyone move like that?" he muttered. One of them shook his head. "Oh, it wasn't fighting, man. That was something else, a karate." Another said quietly. "Oh, that's what Laurie called it." The leader's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. He hated feeling weak. But beneath that hate was something new. Curiosity. "A karate, huh?" he repeated under his breath, the word lingering like a challenge. Across town, Samuel turned onto a quiet street lined with trees. He lived alone in a modest house with a small front porch and wind chimes that whispered in the night air. As he unlocked his door, the faint creak of the hinge greeted him like an old friend. He stepped inside, turned on a soft lamp, and exhaled deeply. The night's stillness wrapped around him like an old robe. On the wall, above a neatly folded white gi and a row of worn belts, hung a faded photograph, Samuel in his prime, surrounded by students, all smiling, all proud. Beneath it was a plaque that read, "Strength is not in the fist, but in the heart that controls it." Samuel's gaze lingered on that line for a long moment. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that only comes from a life well lived and lessons well learned. Well, back in the car, the leader finally started the engine, but before driving off, he said quietly, "We messed with the wrong guy tonight, but maybe we were meant to." His friends looked at him, surprised. "Think about it," he continued. "He didn't hurt us. He could have. But he didn't." That's not weakness. That's strength. For the first time, none of them argued. None of them laughed. They just sat there, each lost in his own thoughts. As the car pulled away, the sound of the engine faded into the night. Somewhere deep down, something had shifted in all of them. A seed had been planted, a quiet, uncomfortable awareness that maybe respect wasn't something you demanded through fear, but something you earned through discipline. And miles away, as Samuel turned off his lamp and sat in the dark, he closed his eyes and whispered softly to himself, still teaching, even when they don't know they're learning. The wind outside rustled through the trees. Peace settled over the little house. But in that peace, there was power, the kind of power that doesn't shout, doesn't boast, doesn't break, but builds. Have you ever had a moment from your past that refused to let you go? A single night, a single choice that replays in your mind until it becomes the turning point of who you are? For those 5 young men, that night at the bar became exactly that. Days passed, but the memory of the old man's calm, unshakable presence haunted them. They'd faced a kind of strength they didn't understand, a strength that didn't come from muscle or rage, but from something quieter, something real. The leader, whose name was Evan, couldn't shake it off. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw the bruise on his jaw, not as a mark of humiliation, but as a reminder. He found himself wondering, who was that man, really? One evening, curiosity pulled him back to the bar. Lori was there, polishing glasses behind the counter. When Evan walked in, she tensed, ready for more trouble. But he wasn't the same. His posture was different, his voice quieter. "I'm not here for that," he said quickly, raising his hands. I wanted to ask about him." Kyle. Lori studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You mean Samuel?" He nodded. "Yeah, I can't stop thinking about what happened. The way he moved, the way he stayed calm, even when we were acting like idiots." "Who is he?" Lori smiled faintly. "He used to teach martial arts here in town. Had a small dojo near the community center, taught kids for decades. A few of his students became police officers. One even opened a dojo of his own in another city. Samuel retired about 10 years ago after his wife passed away." Evan's expression softened. "He lost his wife?" "Lost his wife?" "Yeah," Lori said quietly. "That's why he comes here every Friday. They used to meet here after her shifts. He never drinks, just sits in her old spot with a glass of water, says it helps him remember." Evan swallowed hard, guilt burning in his chest. "Oh, we had no idea." "I know," Lori replied. "But maybe now you do." He left the bar that night with a weight in his heart he didn't fully understand. He told his friends what he'd learned, and for once they didn't laugh. Something inside them shifted too. The following week, Evan did something no one expected. he found Samuel's old dojo. The sign was faded, the windows dusty, but inside the mats were still laid out neatly. Samuel was there, sweeping the floor, humming softly to himself. When Evan stepped inside, Samuel looked up, calm but cautious. "Well, I figured you might show up," he said. "You've got questions." Evan nodded. "I came to apologize, and maybe to learn." Samuel studied him for a long moment. There was no judgment in his gaze, only quiet understanding. Then, without a word, he handed Evan a broom. "A start by sweeping," Samuel said. Evan blinked. "The sweeping?" Samuel smiled. "You learn respect with your hands before you learn control with your fists, so that's how it began." Every evening after work, Evan came to the dojo. Sometimes his friends joined him. They started with cleaning, then with stances, then breathing. Samuel taught them not just how to fight, but how not to. Weeks turned into months. The noise in their heads started to quiet. The anger began to fade. What replaced it was something new: discipline, humility, peace. And one evening when class ended, Samuel looked at them and said, "What you did that night doesn't define you. What you do after it does." The boys bowed their heads, not in fear this time, but in respect. Real respect. Outside, the sun set behind the dojo, painting the world in gold. Samuel watched them leave, a faint smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone, because even after all this time, he was still doing what he was born to do: teaching. Not through force, not through power, but through example. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.